Hello and welcome to Let's Talk. I am Neelam, your host today, and we have a very special guest today with us, Nandita Ghadge. She is the author of the book A Maharaja in Florence. The book is based on the life of Chhatrapati Rajaram Maharaj of Kolhapur and his visit to Europe in the year 1870. Welcome to the show, Nandita.
Thank you so much for having me here.
She has already written a book about the history of Ghadges. The book is called Ghadges, The Rise of a Royal Dynasty, which spans around 600 years of Ghadge history. She is also a renowned interior designer and an artist. I want to ask Nandita, why a separate book for Chhatrapati Rajaram?
Well, the reason to write this particular book and a special book for Rajaram was because I was invited by the few very fans of Rajaram, I would say, in Italy and Florence. And they asked me to come and have a talk. And I thought it would be too difficult to explain the whole history of the Marathas, who Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was, who Rajaram was, what was Kolhapur. So I thought it would be best to write in short the story of Kolhapur, the story of the Marathas, so that a European audience would understand where his lineage came from. And the book was born basically for them, and of course to add his travelogue, which is a very interesting diary of his, which I have included.
So Nandita, what was the inspiration for you to write this book? And what is a Chhatri? Please explain.
Okay. So the inspiration actually came during, I think in the about 35 years ago, when the Yuvraj of Kolhapur was getting married. I was asked to redo some of the rooms, restore them for the wedding. And I came across this beautiful watercolors depicting His Highness Chhatrapati Shahu Maharaj and my husband's grandfather and a few other officials from Kolhapur in this exotic cenotaph in Florence. And that really piqued my curiosity as to what was this Maratha Chhatri doing in Florence. It was
so even you didn't know that he was there. You had no idea.
I had no idea who Rajaram was, what the Chhatri was doing in Florence, why had they gone and visited it. So I was absolutely blank. At that moment, I had no clue.
So even when you were married into the family, you didn't get any stories from your, say, Sasubai or
my mother-in-law. Well, I think the family had so much of history that they took it for granted. It was like an everyday affair. So none of them actually spoke about the events or these very rarely.
Right.
It would be, and this I think nobody knew.
Yes, correct. So even in Kolhapur, they don't really know Chhatrapati Rajaram as this Chhatrapati
Nobody.
Rajaram.
They confuse him with Chhatrapati Shivaji's younger son,
Right.
Sambhaji Raje, and then Rajaram.
Right.
Whose wife, Tara Rani, later on formed Kolhapur.
Right.
So that is the Rajaram Maharaj that everybody knows. This Rajaram is not known.
So he's lost
Till
in
now.
the history pages.
He is.
Somewhere. So you wanted to bring that to the fore and let the people of Kolhapur and the world actually know about this forgotten.
Actually, it was a little bit of that. But when I visited his cenotaph or Chhatri in 2000 with my husband, Praveen Singh, I felt a sense of absolute sadness looking at this Chhatri all alone on the banks of the river Arno.
Yeah.
Nobody to go and pay homage to him, nobody to offer flowers on his death anniversary or his birth anniversary. And there was this 20-year-old who was all alone in Florence. And that sort of created a connect him and me. And ever since that, I wanted to know more about him.
Perfect. So he was just 20.
He was just 20.
So why did he decide to take this trip in the year 1870 to Europe, of all places?
For this, I think I must give you a little bit of a background of who he was. He was born to the Princess of Kolhapur, and his uncle, Mama, was the Chhatrapati. And there were two contenders for the throne. There was him and the other sister's son, which is my husband's great-grandfather, that's Jai Singh Rao Ghadge. But he was younger to him. And it so happened that he got adopted. And he was a brilliant young man, very fond of reading. And he was, as in those days, the British kind of took over the tutorship, or all the teaching was done by the British.
Right.
So these two princesses were taken out of the old palace into a kind of a small bungalow where they were, you could call it a mini boarding room,
Yes.
a boarding school, and
Tutors.
private tutors, and they were taught all the British ways, reading, playing billiards, playing cricket. And when the Duke of Edinburgh, the second son of Queen Victoria, visited India in, I think, 18, maybe, I'm not sure, 68 or something. He was absolutely fascinated by the whole pomp and the regalia that happened. And that's when he decided that I must go to Europe. And he started planning. He must have been 18 then. He was adopted when he was 16.
So his aspirations go back to when he was a teenager, just a teenager.
He was very much a teenager.
And to plan this whole, I think it was a 3-month trip or more than that.
Yes, it was, I think he started in June and unfortunately his trip ended in November.
Yes. And can you tell us how? And why did the trip end?
I think that will come to the end of the book. let's not give away the
Sure. So we'll keep that
suspense.
for later, yes. There is one object that inspired you to write this book. What was it?
As I said earlier, it was this painting
Right.
that I saw at the museum, and I was fascinated that a Maratha king should be having a chhatri in Florence.
Right.
And when I visited Florence in 2000, initially nobody knew where the chhatri was. It was very vague. People just knew it was on the banks of the river Arno. And when we decided to go, it was very difficult as to the exact location of the chhatri. Luckily, I had a Dutch friend who kind of knew where it was, and it is located in the end of the Kashine Garden,
Right.
Kashine Park, which is incidentally a park which is formed by the Medici family. It belonged to the Medici family.
Oh, wow. So who is Medici? Can you give a
Medici is
background?
one of the oldest banker families and industrial. I mean, they were one of the wealthiest families of their time.
Didn't they host you this time when in Italy?
No, not the Medicis are no more.
Oh, Medici's are no more. So you launched your book in Italy. Coming back to that.
Right.
So what was your experience there?
As I said, the book came about because I was invited to talk by the Office of the Mayors of Florence. They had read my earlier book and had read my research on him, and they thought it would be nice if I came and, had a little talk on who he was. And the history is rather complicated to explain in a half an hour talk. So I thought I should just maybe very briefly explain the Maratha roots, who Shivaji Maharaj is, how Kolhapur was formed, and what a great lineage this young prince had.
So before we proceed, what is a chhatri? And what is its importance?
So the chhatri is a symbol, or a rather tangible structure, which kind of reminds us of our ancestors. It is a place where you pay homage every year for their death anniversary or their birth anniversary. And basically it is a reminder for these old families, for the new descendants, to remember what their ancestors have sacrificed, their morals, their values. So it is a continuation of the family tradition that is carried on through this Senetov, or a chhatri as we call it in Marathi. And it's a remembrance of your ancestors. It's basically to remember them for what they were and what we are because of them.
Okay. So this chhatri is in Florence, and it's very famous in Florence.
Yes.
And that's why the book launch also created a lot of buzz. So can you tell us a little bit more about it?
When I was first invited to talk about this, about him, I thought it would be a small gathering where I would sort of, meet a few of the dignitaries.
Yes.
And discuss a little bit about the Maratha history, about him. And actually, before I even landed in Florence, I got one of the senior journalists of one of the leading newspapers of Italy called La Repubblica.
Yes.
So Lenocci sent me these series of questions, out of which one of them was the chhatri.
Right.
And he wrote a beautiful article, a full-page article in that newspaper, which was quite an honor.
Wow.
So that itself surprised me. And as soon as I landed in Florence, I had like 4 or 5 journalists coming and interviewing me, asking me about the family, what his history was. And I was absolutely overwhelmed with the kind of response that I was getting. It was not expected. And I was, any shop that I went to as a tourist, and they would introduce me that she has written a book on what they call him the Indiano there.
Oh.
He's known as the Indiano. And they would introduce me saying she has written about the Indiano, and they would get so excited, and they would want to know when the function is. They wanted to come and hear about it. So I was really surprised at the love and the warmth that they have. He's become an icon.
He's an icon because
He's
there's a
become an
bridge
icon.
named after him.
Yes,
There's a bridge named after him, and they've also restored the chhatri.
right.
So tell us more about that.
So the bridge is a very interesting story. This Italian journalist called Francesca Ciappolo,
Right.
she said, do you know how many times the Ponte di Indiano is, mentioned during the day? So they have a bridge over the Arno River, which is called the Indiano Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
So every time an Italian or somebody is taking the bridge, they'll say, okay, take the viaduct, take the Indiano, take the Indiano. So she says it's like the word has become part of their
vocabulary.
travel vocabulary.
Nice.
And what was the other question you said?
So they also restored the chhatri.
Right.
So why would they do that?
I was surprised too. But I met the architect and the restoration team. They had come for my
great.
book launch. And she was very humble enough to show me what all they have restored in the chhatri. His nose had got disfigured, the color inside the chhatri. She said, I have tried to make it as authentic as possible. They've used old colors from the 155 years ago. And they have done a beautiful job. And I wish our Indian restorers could go there just to see how much love and affection they have shown toward Indian monument.
Absolutely. So that's why my next question is, there's already a diary of the Raja of Kolhapur by him about his travel to Europe. Why did you feel the need to write another book about him?
The diary I came across when I came back from Florence in my first trip. And it's a very, very sweet diary, but written very, to the point, saying I visited, say, Disraeli, I went to the parliament, I went to an opera, I saw,
Right.
circus. And there are some characters in it which we may not know of today, after 150 years.
Correct.
They were important people in those times, like Max Muller or, Penders, who has laid the telegraphic cable from England to India. And he was there for that first telegram that was sent by the Prince of Wales to the Indian Governor General.
So people don't know about it.
So I didn't know about it.
You also did not know
and
about it.
And when I started trying to figure out who these people were, I thought, I kind of read about them and then put it in 1 or 2 lines. And then I was hoping that it would add a little more value to his diary. That is my contribution, trying to make sense of who those people are, or maybe to an Indian reader, what is Buckingham Palace, what is Windsor, what is Eton.
Yeah, and there are pictures, very lovely pictures also.
And that is, I think, my artistic passion, to make a book as presentable and
relatable, beautiful for people who just don't like to read. They want to have some visual aid also.
I think it's always interesting.
So it's for reading for maybe a child to somebody who's older as well. I
think even older, then you kind of relate to what your words are describing. So it's a little more input.
That's great. Great.
We've tried, as you were part of the editing, we've tried to get pictures which are from that time.
That era.
So we've tried to keep the mood from 1800s, 1870 to 1800s.
Beautiful. Also, I wanted to ask you, is there any interesting bit from the book that you want to talk about?
Interesting bit, you mean about his food habits? Or
yes, his food habits in Europe.
Okay, so I think he was one of the first Hindu Maratha king to have crossed the 7 seas.
Right.
And in those days, it was forbidden by religion. You could lose your caste according to the old.
That was that serious.
It was serious. So he was very, very particular. He had carried his cooks, his also his
entourage.
His whole entourage. And wherever he stayed, he was given a separate room.
Right.
And it's very beautifully described by one of the British writers, saying how they had their vessels, they had their spices, and they would not let the English touch any of their vessels nor their water. And of course, they would very sweetly offer the food to the Europeans. But other than that, he only, I think on official functions or dinners, he only had champagne and peaches or grapes.
Right, that's it.
So he refused to eat at any of the official dinners.
That's great. That's an interesting fact, actually. People, he followed that. He didn't let go of that on his trip, and he didn't forget his roots.
He did not forget his roots, yet he was open enough to participate in all their activities.
Right.
He loved the opera.
Yes.
He loved the music, the dances.
The plays.
He loved the plays. Theater. I think he's not missed a single play.
Wow.
He's visited all the theatres in London and wherever he visited, Ireland, wherever.
That's a great itinerary. He also met Queen Victoria.
Yes, I believe she was quite fascinated by him. I think so. Because he was invited twice.
To meet her.
She met him twice.
Yes, you did.
And she was, according to him, she was very, very courteous and very warm. She asked him about his, journey. She also introduced him to her daughter Beatrice, Princess Beatrice.
Yes.
So that must be an honor.
In those times.
Yes. And they have described how he's gone to visit her, and he's gone to the Buckingham Palace. And
so there is a very interesting article in the book written by Lady Verney, a British observer. So do you mind reading out that for us?
Yes.
Let me just open that page.
102, I think.
Yes.
So this is Lady Verney, who's written a small article in one of the British magazines, and I'll start with her quote. A young Indian prince, in the curious convergence of individuals from the farthest corners of the globe that perpetually find its way to London, the cosmopolitan hub, last summer saw the arrival of a young Indian sovereign prince, the Maharaja of Kolhapur. It marked the first instance of a reigning Hindu monarch daring to venture into the realms. So far, the journey was a great event amongst his people, who were very much distressed at the idea of his crossing the sea. The whole undertaking was one, indeed, requiring a degree of resolution which is difficult for us to realize. He belonged, however, to the Marathas, who are more enterprising than most races of Hindus. He spoke English well, and he had acquired a certain knowledge of modern history and of politics and statesmen of the day, which enabled him to be interested in the conversation going on around him. He was barely 20, though he looked much older, a small-made man with extremely slender hands and feet, his complexion of a pleasantly brown color, which looked as if it had been just ripened by the sun, not scorched black. The eyes were very large and lustrous, without many expressions, and a contemplative, rather childlike look. His white teeth shone brilliantly. However, when he spoke and lighted up the dark face, a kindly, gentle young prince, not wanting in intelligence, with a sort of easy dignity, as if one is used to be obeyed, but quite content to remain languidly in the place where he happened to be, that one wondered the more to see him venturing so far from home.
Beautiful.
So, yes. Describes him as an intelligent young king.
And they must be so fascinated by his whole attire and
Yes.
his jewels and everything.
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And the pagdi.
The pagdi. And
they called it a sort of a turban.
A turban.
But obviously it's known as a pagdi. And another reason why I wanted to correct also in this book was the statue which is in Florence, he has a pagdi. But they assume it is a turban. So they called him a Punjabi king.
Right.
And they presume that the inscriptions on the chhatri were Punjabi. They're not. They are in fact Marathi. So they're in English, Marathi and Italian.
So unfortunately, Chhatrapati Rajaram passed away on the trip in Florence, and hence the chhatri was built in his honor. Can you tell us more about the reaction from the Italians to his death?
Well, I have kind of described the unfortunate journey of his illness in Venice. And then when he landed in Florence, he was very, very ill. And initially he refused to take any treatment from the European physicians.
Right.
But they kind of, he was insisting on his own Hakim, but I think he realized the severity of his illness, and they called in two Italian and a British physician. Unfortunately, he was doing well, and then he suddenly collapsed, which is really sad.
Yes.
Now the question came about the cremation. And in 1870, Florence was a very Christian domain, ruled
Conservative.
by the Vatican.
Yes.
So they had to get papal permissions. So in those days, the mayor of Florence was Ubaldini Perezzi, whose descendants I met recently.
Yes.
And the British diplomat. They worked overnight to get this unusual permission, because cremation was punishable by death or jail.
Right.
It was not allowed.
Yeah, because they bury their dead.
It was not
true.
allowed.
Catholics.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So then, of course, they tried to do the cremation during the night, hoping that it would not shock the Florentine people. But they were too curious. The whole ceremony is described in detail, which you will read in the book.
Yes.
And it's a very interesting take on how they have described the whole cremation process.
Right.
Now, one question haunts me as to, okay, fine, they let the cremation take place. Next day, they gathered the ashes. They were sent to Kolhapur. The whole entourage went back to Kolhapur. Why would they then consider building a chhatri? Right?
Yes.
My answer to this is my perception, that he belonged to the family of the great Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, and as his descendant, I think the governments decided to honor that legacy, and he was given this spot. Another thing which is very interesting is the Chhatri is on the confluence of the river Ano and Mugnon, and as a special, it is Mugnon is a river that they only let. It's a dam river.
Right.
So because we believe as Hindus that a Sangam is so important, on that particular day, they let the water of the river Mugnon flow, so that there was a proper Sangam.
Wow.
So that is the kind of sensibility.
Right.
And if you say in today's day where we have such polarized views on everything, religion, countries and relationships, I think in 1870 for them to have such an open-hearted view on someone else's religion and to be so sensitive,
that's brilliant.
I think it's
commendable.
It's a beautiful
actually.
example of being so tolerant.
That's amazing. Wow. So you think that Kolhapur lost a potential visionary king due to his untimely death?
Definitely. From the views of his British officials, the people that he met in England,
right?
He was a very likable, very intelligent person, very interested in what was happening. He's visited the parliament, he's listened to debates, he's, culturally very rich.
Right.
He started a school before he left for Europe, which is now the Rajaram High School
in Kolhapur.
He had visions of teaching girls in those days. And I believe there's a letter in the book which his widow later on says that at the wishes of my husband, I am making sure that his daughter-in-law and her herself, the widow also wanted to learn English, and she's written a letter to Queen Victoria saying, this is how I'm bringing up my children as the wishes of my late husband.
And she wrote that in
Maharaja.
English.
she wrote that in English, and
That's
that
brilliant.
is also printed in this
Wow.
book. Yeah.
That's amazing. Such a great story. And what do you think is a takeaway for the younger generation or people of today from this book or from Chhatrapati Rajaram?
There are a lot of, we as the modern generation think we are very, modern in our thinking,
Progressive.
progressive in our
Yes.
views. But if you think of his time and the way he has kind of blended into their society, tried to, without leaving his own culture
Right.
and his own
Right.
traditions,
Right.
he has, become a very beautiful medium of joining the two cultures.
Hmm.
I'm sure he would have brought a lot of progress
Right.
to Kolhapur. But I think Kolhapur's been fortunate with its rulers. His grandson, Chhatrapati Shahu Maharaj, was
Legendary.
visionary, yes,
Yeah,
and he,
legendary.
I think, put into actions all his dreams.
Yes,
I
that-
would say that.
Amazing. Amazing. So, to wrap up this episode and this interview, I would like to ask you any final thoughts.
Well, when I went to Italy, I was very sure Chhatrapati Raja Maharaj was a Kolhapuri, a Maratha, I had that notion in my mind. But when I went to Florence and I realized the kind of affection, warmth and love that they have about him, even after 155 years, they have kept him alive in their memory. In Kolhapur, if you were to ask who Raja Maharaj is,
Right.
they probably won't know. Hopefully this book will enlighten them.
Yes.
So during my speech there, I sort of said to them that I think Rajaram now belongs to Florence. He's part of the Florence. He's a Florentine
He's a Florentine.
because he lived in Kolhapur and in India only for 19 years, while he has lived in their memory for 155 years.
Wow.
And they loved it because it's so true,
Great. And
So he is now also part Florentine as much as a Kolhapuri Maratha. So
Wow.
yeah, he belongs to both the countries.
So keep watching Air the channel for Let's Talk, more episodes of Let's Talk with more such interesting guests. And we'll hopefully see you in another episode of Let's Talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Let's Talk on the Air the channel, and I hope you all subscribe and press the like button.
Yes,
if you
please.
like this episode.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having
Thank
me
you.
and the whole team. They've been really very, very calming, and this being my first podcast,
Mine too.
I think the credit goes to
The
the
team.
team for making us
Lovely
so
team.
comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you so much.